Rebecca Martinez never imagined that accepting a dream job would lead to her enslavement in a foreign country. At 28 years old, this certified nanny from Portland, Oregon, thought she had found the answer to her desperate financial situation. Instead, she found herself trapped in a nightmare that would last for months, held captive by a wealthy Saudi family who had carefully planned her exploitation from the very first contact. What began as 5 seemingly legitimate trips to care for children would transform into a terrifying reality where her passport became a prison sentence and her American citizenship meant nothing behind the walls of a guarded compound in Riyadh. This is the true story of how a professional woman with excellent credentials became a modern slave, and how she fought her way back to freedom. Rebecca Martinez lived at 2847 Oakwood Avenue in Portland, Oregon, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment that she shared with her 6-year-old daughter, Emma. The small space was filled with photographs of happier times, before Emma's asthma diagnosis had turned their comfortable life into a constant financial struggle. Rebecca had worked as a certified nanny for 7 years, building an impressive reputation throughout the Portland area. Her references were exceptional. Every family she had worked for praised her patience, her educational approach to childcare, and her natural ability to connect with children of all ages. She held certifications in pediatric first aid, early childhood education, and child development. On paper, Rebecca was exactly the kind of professional that wealthy families competed to hire, but credentials and praise did not pay medical bills. Emma's asthma required expensive medications, regular specialist appointments, and occasional emergency room visits that insurance only partially covered. Rebecca's current position paid $45,000 annually, a decent salary in many places, but barely enough in Portland's expensive housing market, especially with medical bills that sometimes reached $3,000 per month during bad seasons. She worked extra weekend hours when she could find them, picked up babysitting jobs in the evenings, and still watched her savings account shrink month after month. At night, after Emma fell asleep, Rebecca would sit at her kitchen table reviewing bills and loan statements, calculating and recalculating numbers that never improved, no matter how many times she added them up. Her mother, Patricia Martinez, who lived across town in a retirement community, helped when she could, but her fixed income left little room for assistance beyond occasional groceries and watching Emma when Rebecca worked late. Rebecca's father had passed away 3 years earlier, and she had no siblings to turn to for support. Emma's father had disappeared before their daughter's first birthday, providing no child support despite court orders. Rebecca was truly alone in her struggle, carrying the weight of single parenthood and mounting debt with quiet determination that was slowly wearing her down. It was on a Tuesday evening in August 2021 when Rebecca discovered the job posting that would change everything. She had been browsing an exclusive domestic staffing website called Elite Worldwide Placements, a platform she had heard about from other professional nannies who had secured high-paying positions with wealthy international families. The website required professional credentials and references just to create a profile, which gave it an air of legitimacy that appealed to Rebecca's careful nature. Most of the postings were for positions in Manhattan, Los Angeles, or Miami, caring for the children of executives and celebrities. But one posting stood out immediately, demanding her attention with promises that seemed almost too good to be true. The listing described a position with a distinguished Saudi Arabian family seeking an American nanny to care for their 3 children, ages 3 to 7. The job required 3-month assignments in Riyadh, with return flights to the United States between each assignment. The salary was listed as $8,000 per month, tax-free, with all room and board provided, along with first-class travel arrangements. Rebecca read the posting 3 times, her heart racing as she calculated what that money could mean for her situation. $8,000 monthly was nearly double her current annual salary condensed into just 1 month. 3 months of work would earn $24,000, enough to pay off most of Emma's medical debt and still have savings left over. She almost closed the website, assuming the posting must be a scam. Nothing legitimate paid that much for childcare. she told herself. But something made her read it one more time. The posting was detailed and professional, listing specific requirements about certifications, experience levels, and personality traits they sought in a candidate. It mentioned the importance of cultural sensitivity and adaptability, noting that the family maintained both traditional Saudi values and modern educational approaches. The language was sophisticated and formal, very different from the casual tone of obvious scam postings she had seen before. At the bottom of the listing was contact information for elite international placement services, with a New York City address at 1523 Madison Street and a phone number with a proper area code. Rebecca took a screenshot of the posting and spent the next hour researching elite international placement services. The agency had a professional website with testimonials from dozens of domestic workers who had been placed in positions worldwide. Their office address in Manhattan checked out on Google Street View, showing an actual office building in a professional district. The agency was registered with the Better Business Bureau and had an A- rating. Reviews from past clients mentioned successful placements, professional service, and legitimate job opportunities. Everything Rebecca could verify suggested this was a real company, not some internet scam operation. Still cautious, Rebecca decided to submit her resume and credentials through the website's application portal. She wrote a careful cover letter explaining her experience, her certifications, and her interest in international work. She mentioned her financial situation honestly, explaining that she was a single mother seeking to provide better opportunities for her daughter through short-term but well-compensated work. She submitted the application at 11 o'clock that night, then went to bed trying not to get her hopes up too much. The response came within 18 hours. An email from Samantha Chen, Senior Placement Coordinator at Elite International Placement Services, expressed strong interest in Rebecca's application. The email was professional and detailed, explaining that the Saudi family had reviewed her credentials and wanted to schedule a preliminary video interview. Samantha provided her direct phone number and office extension, along with several possible interview times over the next week. The email signature included the company logo, address, and multiple contact methods. Rebecca called her mother immediately, reading the email aloud and asking for advice. Patricia Martinez was skeptical from the first mention of Saudi Arabia. She had read news stories about domestic workers being mistreated in the Middle East, about passports being confiscated and workers being trapped. She begged Rebecca to be careful, to investigate thoroughly before making any commitments. But she also understood her daughter's desperation. She saw how Rebecca struggled, how the stress was aging her beyond her 28 years, how worry kept her awake at night. Patricia promised to support whatever decision Rebecca made, but insisted she at least consult with someone who understood international employment law. Rebecca called her friend David Thompson, a lawyer who practiced immigration and employment law from a small office at 891 Pine Street in Portland. David and Rebecca had met years earlier when she had nannied for his sister's children, and they had maintained a casual friendship since then. When Rebecca explained the job opportunity, David's first reaction mirrored Patricia's caution. He had handled cases involving foreign workers being exploited in the United States, and he knew the dangers could be even worse for Americans working abroad in countries with different labor protections. But he agreed to help Rebecca investigate the opportunity properly, offering his legal expertise for free, because he knew she could not afford his normal rates. The preliminary video interview took place on a Saturday morning, with Emma staying at Patricia's apartment so Rebecca could focus without interruptions. Samantha Chen appeared on screen from what looked like a professional office, with the Elite International Placement Services logo visible on the wall behind her. She was a woman in her 40s, professionally dressed, speaking with a slight accent that suggested English was not her first language, but one she spoke fluently. The interview lasted 45 minutes and covered Rebecca's experience, her educational background, her approach to childcare, and her comfort level with international travel and cultural differences. Samantha explained the family's background carefully. They were connected to minor Saudi royalty, wealthy, but not part of the direct ruling family. The father worked in international business with government contracts, which required frequent travel. The mother focused on the children and household management, following traditional values while ensuring her children received modern, internationally minded education. And they had employed foreign nannies before, always with positive experiences, and they specifically preferred American nannies because they valued the educational methods and cultural perspectives Americans brought to childcare. The 3-month assignment structure was explained in detail. Rebecca would fly to Riyadh at the start of each assignment, work for exactly 3 months caring for the children, then return to the United States for a break of at least 1 month before the next assignment began. During her time in Saudi Arabia, she would live in private quarters within the family compound, with her own bedroom, bathroom, and sitting area. Her working hours would typically be 8 to 10 hours daily, 6 days per week, with Fridays off to respect the local weekend. All meals would be provided, and she would have access to the compound's amenities, including a gym and swimming pool. The salary would be paid monthly via wire transfer to her American bank account, with the first payment made in advance before she left Portland. Samantha scheduled a second interview for the following week, this time directly with a member of the family. She sent Rebecca several documents to review beforehand, including a detailed job description, a sample contract, and information about Saudi culture and customs. Rebecca spent the next 5 days reading everything carefully, taking notes, and discussing concerns with David Thompson. The job description seemed reasonable, listing typical nanny duties along with some light educational tutoring and occasional help with household organization. The cultural information emphasized the importance of modest dress, respectful behavior, and understanding that Saudi Arabia had different social norms than the United States, particularly regarding women's roles and public behavior. The second video interview connected Rebecca directly with Noura al-Rashid, who introduced herself as the mother of the children Rebecca would care for. Noura appeared to be in her mid-30s, wearing a hijab and speaking excellent English with a British-influenced accent. She was warm and friendly, asking thoughtful questions about Rebecca's childcare philosophy and sharing information about her 3 children. Layla was 7 years old, passionate about reading and art. Omar was 5, energetic and curious about everything, particularly animals and science. Sarah was 3, still learning English alongside Arabic, with a sweet personality but occasional tantrums typical for her age. Noura explained that her family valued education highly and wanted their children to be comfortable in both Arabic and English, understanding both Saudi traditions and international perspectives. She said they had employed nannies from America, Britain, and Canada over the years, always maintaining professional relationships and treating their staff with respect. She mentioned that their previous American nanny had returned to the United States for personal family reasons after 2 years of excellent service, and they had her available as a reference if Rebecca wanted to contact her. Rebecca asked about security concerns and safety in Saudi Arabia. Noura acknowledged that the country was different from America, but emphasized that foreign workers in professional positions lived very safely, particularly in affluent areas of Riyadh, where their family compound was located. She explained that the compound had security staff, that Rebecca would have access to transportation whenever needed, and that the American embassy was readily accessible if any issues arose. Noura also mentioned that several other foreign domestic workers lived in the compound, including a Filipino housekeeper and an Egyptian cook, so Rebecca would not be isolated as the only foreigner. The conversation lasted over an hour, and by the end, Rebecca felt genuinely comfortable with Noura. The Saudi woman seemed educated, reasonable, and sincerely interested in finding the right person to care for her children rather than just filling a position. Noura invited Rebecca to think carefully about the opportunity, to discuss it with her family and any advisors, and to contact the agency with any questions or concerns. She ended the interview by saying that Rebecca was their first choice for the position, but they would wait for her to make a fully informed decision rather than pressuring her for an immediate answer. After the interview, Rebecca felt torn between opportunity and caution. The position seemed legitimate and professionally handled. Both Samantha Chen and Noura al-Rashid had been transparent and thorough in their explanations. The money would solve her immediate financial crisis and provide security for Emma's future, but the warnings from her mother and David Thompson echoed in her mind, reminding her of risks she could not fully evaluate from thousands of miles away in Portland. David Thompson received the contract documents from Elite International Placement Services and spent several days reviewing every clause and provision. The contract was professionally drafted, with proper legal language covering all aspects of the employment relationship. It specified the salary amount, payment schedule, working hours, living arrangements, and conditions for termination by either party. It included provisions for emergency medical care, travel arrangements, and dispute resolution. Most importantly to David, it contained clear clauses stating that Rebecca's passport would remain in her possession at all times, that she could terminate the contract with 2 weeks' notice, and that the family would provide return transportation to the United States if either party ended the agreement. The contract also addressed Saudi Arabian labor law, noting that domestic workers in the kingdom had specific protections under recent reforms. It referenced a Saudi government registry where all foreign domestic workers had to be officially registered, with their contracts filed with the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development. This registration meant that Rebecca's presence in the country would be officially documented, not hidden or off the books. David found this reassuring, though he noted that enforcement of labor protections in Saudi Arabia might not match American standards. After his review, David told Rebecca that the contract appeared legitimate and professionally structured. He noted some provisions that were less favorable than American employment law would require, but nothing that seemed predatory or dangerous. His main concern was practical rather than legal, the inherent vulnerability of being alone in a foreign country where she did not speak the language and did not fully understand the culture. He advised her to maintain regular contact with family, to keep copies of all important documents, and to know the location and contact information for the American embassy in Riyadh before she left Portland. Rebecca made her decision on a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after first seeing the job posting. She was sitting at her kitchen table, as she had done countless times before, looking at medical bills and loan statements that represented months and years of debt she could not overcome with her current salary. Emma was asleep in the next room, her breathing slightly labored even with the expensive medications that Rebecca struggled to afford. Rebecca thought about the alternative, continuing to work for $45,000 annually, falling further behind on bills, watching her daughter grow up in poverty despite Rebecca's best efforts. She called Samantha Chen the next morning and accepted the position. Samantha was delighted, immediately beginning the process of arranging travel documents and finalizing the contract. She explained that Elite International Placement Services would handle all the visa paperwork, coordinating with the Saudi embassy in Washington, D.C., to obtain the proper work authorization. The process would take approximately 3 weeks, during which Rebecca would need to provide various documents, including her passport, recent medical exam results, background check information, and copies of her childcare certifications. The agency also requested a signed contract and asked Rebecca to provide her bank account information for salary wire transfers. Before she left Portland, the family would transfer the first month's salary of $8,000 as a sign of good faith and to help with her expenses during the transition. Samantha explained this was standard practice with international placements, giving the worker financial security before leaving their home country. Rebecca shared the news with her mother and with Emma, trying to explain in age-appropriate terms that Mommy would be working in another country for a little while, but would come home regularly and call every day. Emma did not fully understand, but she recognized that her mother seemed happier and less stressed than she had been in months. Patricia remained worried, but supported her daughter's decision, offering to care for Emma during Rebecca's assignments abroad. 3 weeks later, Rebecca received her Saudi work visa and employment authorization. Elite international placement services had handled everything efficiently, and all the paperwork appeared legitimate and official. The family transferred $8,000 to Rebecca's bank account as promised, and she spent a portion of it paying down her most urgent medical bills while saving the rest for Emma's care during her absence. She shopped for appropriate modest clothing for Saudi Arabia, researched the country's culture and customs, and prepared herself mentally for the adventure ahead. Her departure was scheduled for September 15, 2021. She would fly first class from Portland to Los Angeles, then continue on to Riyadh with a connection in London. The entire journey would take approximately 20 hours, but the first-class arrangements meant she would travel in comfort. The family had spared no expense, which Rebecca took as another positive sign about their wealth and professionalism. On the morning of her departure, Rebecca hugged Emma tightly at Patricia's apartment, promising to video call every single day and to bring back presents from Saudi Arabia. Emma cried but was comforted by her grandmother's presence and the promise that Mommy would be home again in just 3 months. Patricia hugged her daughter with tears in her eyes, making Rebecca promise one more time to be careful and to contact the embassy immediately if anything felt wrong. Rebecca boarded her flight with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had never flown first class before, had never traveled outside the United States except for one trip to Canada. The luxury of the flight was overwhelming at first. The comfortable seat that converted into a bed, the attentive service, the excellent food and drinks. She tried to relax and enjoy the experience, but her mind kept racing ahead to what awaited her in Riyadh. She reviewed the information about the family repeatedly, memorizing the children's names and ages, reading about Saudi customs, preparing herself for a culture completely different from anything she had experienced in Portland. The flight to Los Angeles was smooth and pleasant. During her layover, Rebecca called her mother to confirm she had made it safely through the first leg of her journey. Then she boarded the international flight to London, where she would connect to her final flight to Riyadh. The hours passed in a blur of movies, attempted sleep, and persistent anxiety about the unknown ahead. When she finally landed at King Khalid International Airport in Riyadh, exhausted but alert, Rebecca's life was about to change in ways she could never have predicted from the safety of her Portland apartment. The heat hit Rebecca immediately when she stepped out of the air-conditioned airport terminal. It was late afternoon in Riyadh, and the September temperature was still over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. She had dressed modestly as advised, wearing loose pants and a long-sleeved blouse with a scarf draped over her head. But the dry desert heat was unlike anything she had experienced in the Pacific Northwest. She pulled her suitcase behind her, scanning the crowd of drivers and families waiting in the arrival area, looking for someone holding a sign with her name. A man in his 30s wearing traditional Saudi dress approached her with a professional smile. He held a printed sign that read, "Miss Rebecca Martinez, welcome to Saudi Arabia," in English letters. The man introduced himself as Hassan Ahmed, the family's driver, speaking English with a heavy accent but clear enough for Rebecca to understand easily. He was polite and respectful, immediately offering to take her suitcase and guide her to the vehicle. Rebecca followed him through the crowded terminal to the parking area, noting the mixture of traditional and modern dress among the Saudi people around her. The Arabic signs she could not read, the calls to prayer echoing from speakers throughout the airport. Hassan's vehicle was a large black Mercedes SUV, new and immaculate, with deeply tinted windows and leather interior that had been cooled to a comfortable temperature. He loaded her suitcase into the back and opened the rear passenger door for her, indicating she should sit in the back seat rather than up front with him. Rebecca settled into the comfortable seat, accepting the bottle of cold water Hassan offered her, and tried to take in her surroundings as they left the airport and merged onto a wide, modern highway. Riyadh looked nothing like she had expected. The highway was multiple lanes in each direction, filled with expensive cars driving at high speeds. Modern skyscrapers rose in the distance, their glass surfaces reflecting the afternoon sun. Shopping centers and business complexes lined the roadway, looking as contemporary as anything in Los Angeles or Miami. Hassan pointed out landmarks as they drove, explaining in his limited English that Riyadh was a very modern city, that it had grown dramatically in recent decades, that the kingdom was changing and developing rapidly while maintaining its traditional Islamic values. The drive took approximately 40 minutes, moving from the commercial districts near the airport into residential areas where high walls surrounded private compounds and villas. Hassan eventually turned onto a quiet street in an affluent neighborhood called Al-Nakhil district, stopping at an impressive metal gate set into a wall that was at least 10 feet high. He pressed a button on a remote control, and the gate slid open automatically, revealing a long driveway leading into a large property with multiple buildings. The compound was more extensive than Rebecca had imagined from Noura's descriptions. The main house was a 3-story villa with traditional Islamic architectural elements combined with modern glass and steel features. 2 smaller buildings flanked the main house, which Hassan explained were the staff quarters and a guest house. Gardens surrounded the buildings, surprisingly green despite the desert climate, with palm trees providing shade and flowers adding color to the landscape. A high wall surrounded the entire property, with what appeared to be security cameras mounted at regular intervals along the perimeter. Hassan parked near the main house and helped Rebecca with her suitcase, guiding her toward a side entrance. They entered through a cool marble hallway that opened into a large foyer with elaborate chandeliers and expensive furnishings. Rebecca heard children's voices from somewhere deeper in the house, speaking in Arabic with occasional English words mixed in. Hassan asked her to wait in the foyer while he informed the family of her arrival. Within minutes, Noura al-Rashid appeared, dressed in an elegant abaya with her hijab styled beautifully. She smiled warmly and embraced Rebecca in a brief hug, welcoming her to their home with genuine seeming pleasure. Behind Noura came 3 children, clearly the ones Rebecca would be caring for, looking at the strange American woman with a mixture of curiosity and shyness. Noura introduced them in order. Layla at 7 was tall for her age, with intelligent eyes and a polite smile. Omar at 5 was energetic and immediately fascinated by Rebecca's blonde hair, and little Sarah at 3 hid partially behind her mother's abaya, while peeking out at Rebecca with large brown eyes. The children's English was surprisingly good, each greeting Rebecca with practiced phrases that suggested their previous exposure to English-speaking nannies. Layla asked if Rebecca had really flown all the way from America, and could she tell them about the airplane. Omar wanted to know if she had seen any animals during her trip, and did she like dinosaurs because he loved dinosaurs. Sarah simply stared, sucking her thumb, not quite ready to interact with this stranger who would be caring for her. Noura called for someone named Maricel, and moments later a Filipino woman in her 40s appeared. Maricel Santos was the household's housekeeper, and Noura explained that she had been with the family for 3 years. Maricel smiled at Rebecca with the warmth of someone who understood what it was like to be far from home, offering to help get her settled into her quarters. Noura suggested that Rebecca rest for the remainder of the day, adjust to the time difference, and begin her duties the following morning after a good night's sleep. Hassan and Maricel guided Rebecca to the staff quarters building, carrying her luggage between them. The building was 2 stories high, with simple but comfortable apartments for the household staff. Rebecca's quarters were on the 2nd floor, consisting of a bedroom with an ensuite bathroom, a small sitting area with a television and bookshelf, and a kitchenette with a mini refrigerator and microwave. The furnishings were modern and clean, better than some American hotels Rebecca had stayed in during her rare vacations. Large windows overlooked the garden, with curtains that could be closed for privacy. Air conditioning kept the space comfortable despite the desert heat outside. Maricel showed Rebecca where everything was located, explaining the household routines and meal times. Breakfast was served at 7 in the morning in the staff dining area, lunch at noon, dinner at 7 in the evening. Rebecca could eat with the other staff or take meals in her quarters as she preferred. Laundry service was provided twice weekly. The Wi-Fi password was written on a card on the desk, and Maricel explained that internet access was generally good throughout the compound. The main house's staff entrance was accessible 24 hours per day, with the electronic key card Maricel provided. After Maricel left, Rebecca unplugged her phone and immediately connected to the Wi-Fi, relieved when it worked perfectly and she could send messages home. She video called her mother and Emma, showing them her quarters and assuring them she had arrived safely. Emma was excited to see her mother in a new place, asking to see everything in the room and wanting to know when Mommy would come home. Patricia looked relieved but still concerned, making Rebecca promise to check in daily and to call immediately if anything seemed wrong. That first night, exhausted from travel and the time zone change, Rebecca fell asleep easily in the comfortable bed. She woke briefly a few times, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings and the complete silence of the compound at night. Portland had always had ambient noise from traffic and neighbors, but here behind the high walls there was only stillness. She checked her phone repeatedly, reassuring herself that she could still communicate with home, that she was not cut off from the outside world. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and she slept deeply until morning. Her first day of work began at 8 o'clock when she joined the family for breakfast in a sunny dining room overlooking the garden. Faisal al-Rashid was there, the children's father whom Rebecca had not met the previous evening. He was a man in his early 40s, wearing traditional Saudi dress, with a neatly trimmed beard and an authoritative presence. He greeted Rebecca formally in English, welcoming her to their home and expressing confidence that she would be an excellent addition to their household. His English was flawless, spoken with a British accent that suggested education abroad. Breakfast was a mixture of traditional Arabic foods and Western options clearly provided for Rebecca's comfort. The children ate quickly and noisily, excited about their new nanny and eager to show her their rooms, their toys, their favorite places in the compound. Noura explained Rebecca's schedule. She would be with the children from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, 6 days per week, with Fridays off. During school hours, when the older children attended lessons with their tutor, Rebecca would focus on Sarah's care and educational activities. Afternoons would involve outdoor play, educational games, and helping with English language homework. The first week passed in a pleasant routine. The children were well-behaved and engaging, clearly accustomed to having caregivers and responding well to Rebecca's gentle but structured approach. Layla was bright and curious, asking endless questions about America and Rebecca's life in Portland. Omar was energetic but not difficult, easily redirected when his enthusiasm became overwhelming. Little Sarah gradually warmed to Rebecca, eventually sitting in her lap during story time and calling her Miss Becca in her sweet voice that mixed English and Arabic. Rebecca's living conditions were comfortable and her treatment was professional. Noura checked in daily to discuss the children's progress, but never micromanaged or criticized. Faisal was often away on business, but was always polite when present. The household staff, Maricel and Amira Hassan, the Egyptian cook, were friendly and welcoming, happy to have another woman to talk with during their limited free time. Rebecca established a routine of video calling Emma every evening before her daughter's bedtime in Portland, showing her the compound's gardens and introducing her to the children she cared for. On her first Friday off, Maricel invited Rebecca to join her and several other Filipino domestic workers from neighboring compounds for a gathering at a local park where expatriate workers often met. Rebecca accepted gratefully, eager to connect with others who understood the experience of working far from home. The park was surprisingly international, with domestic workers from the Philippines, India, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, and other countries gathering in groups, sharing food and conversation in multiple languages. Several American and European women were there as well, working as nannies or tutors for wealthy Saudi families. Rebecca met Jennifer Morrison, an American woman from Houston who had been working as a nanny in Riyadh for 2 years. Jennifer was enthusiastic about her experience, explaining that while Saudi Arabia was definitely different from America, the money was excellent and treatment varied widely depending on the family. She had worked for 2 different families during her time in the kingdom, leaving the first after 6 months when they became unreasonable about working hours, but loving her current position with a family she described as respectful and generous. Jennifer gave Rebecca her phone number and invited her to join a WhatsApp group for American domestic workers in Riyadh, a support network where women shared advice and warnings about employers. The weeks passed quickly. Rebecca fell into a comfortable routine, growing genuinely fond of the children and feeling increasingly confident that she had made the right decision. The salary was deposited into her American bank account as promised, $8,000 appearing like magic at the end of her first month. She immediately transferred half to her mother for Emma's care and medical expenses, using another portion to pay down debt and saving the remainder. For the first time in years, Rebecca felt financially secure rather than desperately struggling. Her communication with home remained consistent. She spoke with Emma every day, watching via video as her daughter adjusted to living with Grandma Patricia. Emma missed her mother but was doing well in school and enjoying having her grandmother's full attention. Patricia sent regular updates about Emma's health, reporting that her asthma was well controlled and they had been able to afford all her medications without any missed doses or emergency room visits. The second month passed much like the first. Rebecca's relationship with the children deepened. They trusted her completely, coming to her with questions and problems, seeking her comfort when hurt or upset. Nora seemed genuinely pleased with Rebecca's work, commenting multiple times that the children's English was improving, and they seemed happier and more engaged. Even Faisal, who remained somewhat distant and formal, expressed his appreciation for Rebecca's professional approach to his children's care. During the 3rd month, Rebecca began to feel truly settled. The strangeness of Saudi Arabia had faded into familiarity. She knew her way around the compound, understood the household routines, could anticipate the children's needs and moods. She had made friends among the expatriate community, regularly meeting other American and European nannies on her Fridays off. She felt safe behind the compound's high walls, protected by security staff, living in comfort that exceeded her expectations. As her 3-month assignment approached its end, Nora asked if Rebecca would be interested in returning for a second assignment. Rebecca had been hoping for this invitation, and she agreed immediately. They discussed timing, settling on January 2022 for her return, giving Rebecca 2 months at home with Emma for the holidays and time to rest. Nora promised the same terms and compensation, expressing hope that Rebecca would continue working with their family for several years through repeated 3-month assignments. Rebecca's departure in mid-December 2021 was emotional. The children cried, especially Sarah, who clung to Rebecca's legs and begged her not to go. Rebecca promised she would be back soon, that she would think about them every day, that she would send them presents from America. Noura embraced her warmly, thanking her for the wonderful care she had provided, and confirming that Hassan would drive her to the airport for her first-class flight home. The flight back to Portland felt different from the anxious journey outward 3 months earlier. Rebecca felt confident and accomplished, returning home with financial security and the knowledge that she had succeeded in a challenging situation. She had thousands of dollars in savings. Her debt was significantly reduced, and she had a guaranteed income source for the foreseeable future. When she landed at Portland International Airport and saw Emma and Patricia waiting for her with welcome signs and balloons, she felt a surge of love and relief that brought tears to her eyes. The 2 months at home passed both too quickly and too slowly. Rebecca cherished every moment with Emma, taking her to do things they had never been able to afford before. Christmas shopping without the constant anxiety about money, dinners at Emma's favorite restaurants, a trip to the coast for a weekend. She paid off more debt, bought Emma new clothes and shoes, took her to the dentist for checkups they had been postponing. Patricia was relieved to see her daughter healthy and happy, the stress lines around her eyes softening for the first time in years. Rebecca also met several times with David Thompson, updating him on her experience and reviewing the contract for her second assignment. The terms were identical to the first, and David remained satisfied that everything appeared legitimate and professional. He reminded Rebecca to maintain her regular communication with family, to keep copies of all documents, and to trust her instincts if anything changed about her treatment or working conditions. January 2022 arrived faster than Rebecca expected. Saying goodbye to Emma was harder the second time, perhaps because they had grown so close again during their 2 months together. But Emma was older now, and better understood that Mommy would be back in 3 months. She had a calendar on her wall where she crossed off each day, counting down to Rebecca's return. Patricia hugged her daughter tightly at the airport, still worried but more confident after seeing Rebecca return safely from the first assignment. The second trip to Riyadh felt routine rather than adventurous. Rebecca knew what to expect, knew Hassan would be waiting at the airport, knew the drive through the city and the arrival at the compound. The children were overjoyed to see her, running to meet her in the foyer, and all talking at once about everything that had happened during her absence. Layla had lost a tooth. Omar had learned to swim. Sarah was speaking more English phrases. They pulled Rebecca toward their playroom, eager to show her new toys and books, desperate for her attention after 3 months without their beloved Nanny. The second 3-month assignment was as smooth as the first. If anything, it was easier because Rebecca knew the routines and the children responded to her even better than before. Her friendships within the expatriate community deepened. She spent several Fridays with Jennifer Morrison and other American women, exploring more of Riyadh, visiting shopping malls and restaurants that catered to Western tastes, finding small pockets of familiarity in the foreign city. One change Rebecca noticed was that Maricel Santos, the friendly Filipino housekeeper who had helped her settle in during the first assignment, was no longer working at the compound. When she asked Noura about this, the explanation was simple. Maricel's contract had ended, and she had returned to the Philippines to be with her family. A new housekeeper had been hired, Fatima Ibrahim from Ethiopia, who was pleasant but less talkative than Maricel had been. Rebecca felt a small pang of disappointment at losing her friend, but accepted that staff turnover was normal in these situations. The second assignment ended in April 2022, with another emotional goodbye from the children and confirmation of a third assignment starting in June. Rebecca returned to Portland with another $24,000 earned, watching her debt shrink to nearly nothing and her savings account grow beyond anything she had imagined possible a year earlier. Emma was thriving under Patricia's care, doing well in school, her asthma well controlled, Their life had stabilized in a way Rebecca had thought impossible during those desperate nights at her kitchen table calculating impossible numbers. The third assignment, beginning in June 2022, continued the pattern. Arrival in Riyadh, joyful reunion with the children, falling back into familiar routines. Rebecca's comfort level was at its peak. She felt confident navigating Saudi culture, comfortable in her role, secure in her relationship with the family. The only small concern was that working hours had gradually extended from the original 8 to 10 hours daily to sometimes 12 or even 14 hours when Noura had social obligations, or Faisal needed the children kept occupied during important business meetings at the compound. But the salary remained excellent, and Rebecca rationalized that occasional long days were a reasonable trade-off for such generous compensation. She also noticed more staff turnover. The cook, Amira Hassan, had been replaced by a Sudanese man named Mohammed Ali. Fatima Ibrahim sometimes appeared anxious or fearful, though she would not discuss why when Rebecca tried to ask. The security staff had changed as well. With new guards Rebecca did not recognize patrolling the compound perimeter. When she mentioned these observations to Jennifer Morrison during a Friday gathering, Jennifer shrugged and said staff turnover was common in Saudi Arabia, that domestic workers came and went frequently for various reasons. Another small red flag appeared during the third assignment that Rebecca initially dismissed. About halfway through the 3 months, her passport was requested by the household manager for what was described as routine visa renewal processing. This had not happened during previous assignments, but when Rebecca expressed concern, Noura explained that visa regulations had changed and all foreign workers needed updated documentation. The passport would be returned within 48 hours once the processing was complete. The passport was indeed returned after 2 days, and Rebecca felt foolish for worrying. She checked it carefully and everything appeared normal. The Saudi work visa properly renewed and stamped. She was learning that bureaucracy in Saudi Arabia operated differently than in America, with more paperwork and official processes that seemed mysterious but were apparently routine. She reminded herself that everything had been professional and legitimate for 9 months, that she had no reason to distrust this family that had treated her well and paid her fairly. The third assignment ended in September 2022 with the now familiar pattern of tearful goodbyes and confirmed plans for a fourth assignment in November. Rebecca had now earned over $70,000 in less than a year of actual work. Her medical debt was completely paid off. She had a substantial emergency fund saved. She had begun contributing to a college fund for Emma. Her life had been transformed in ways that still amazed her when she thought about that first night searching job postings in desperate hope of finding something to change her situation. Rebecca spent October and early November 2022 at home with Emma, enjoying the life that financial security had made possible. She took Emma to Disneyland, something she had always dreamed of doing but could never afford. She bought new furniture for their apartment, replacing the worn pieces they had lived with for years. She took her mother to a nice restaurant for her birthday, picking up the check without the usual anxiety about her bank balance. She felt successful and proud, making good decisions that benefited her daughter and secured their future. When November arrived and it was time to return to Riyadh for the fourth assignment, Rebecca felt confident and eager to continue the arrangement that had worked so perfectly 3 times before. She hugged Emma and Patricia at the airport, promising as always to call every day and to be home in 3 months. She boarded the first-class flight with the comfortable familiarity of an experienced traveler, settling into her seat and looking forward to seeing the children again. She had no way of knowing that this trip would be completely different from the others, that the family who had treated her so professionally for 9 months had been carefully preparing for this moment, that she was flying directly into a trap that had been set from the very beginning. The atmosphere at the compound felt different from the moment Hassan drove through the gates. Rebecca could not articulate exactly what had changed, but something in the air felt wrong. There were more security guards visible around the property, and they watched her with expressions that seemed less professional and more predatory than she remembered. The gardens looked less maintained, as if care had been neglected during her 2-month absence. Even Hassan seemed quieter during the drive from the airport, responding to her friendly questions with brief answers rather than his usual talkative manner. When she entered the main house, Noura greeted her with less warmth than previous arrivals. The embrace was perfunctory rather than genuine, and Noura's smile did not reach her eyes. The children were excited to see Rebecca, but they seemed subdued, looking frequently toward their mother as if seeking permission to show their joy at their nanny's return. Faisal was present, unusual for the time of day, watching Rebecca with an expression she could not read, but that made her uncomfortable in a way she had never felt before in this house. Within an hour of her arrival, Noura requested Rebecca's passport for visa renewal processing. Rebecca felt a spike of anxiety, but reminded herself that this had happened before during the 3rd assignment, and the passport had been returned promptly. She handed over her passport, asking when she could expect it back. Noura said 48 hours as usual, then left the room without further conversation. The casual friendliness that had characterized their relationship for 9 months had vanished, replaced by a cold formality that made Rebecca's stomach tighten with worry. That first evening, Rebecca tried to video call Emma as she did every day, but the Wi-Fi connection kept failing. She went to find Maricel to ask about the internet issues, then remembered that Maricel was no longer working at the compound. Fatima Ibrahim was somewhere in the staff quarters, but when Rebecca knocked on her door, there was no answer. The compound felt empty and hostile in a way it never had before, and Rebecca's unease grew stronger with each passing hour. The first week of the 4th assignment shattered any remaining illusions of normalcy. Rebecca's working hours immediately extended to 14 hours daily, from 6 in the morning until 8 at night, with no breaks except for meals eaten quickly while keeping an eye on the children. Her requests for her usual Friday off were denied with vague explanations about special circumstances requiring her constant presence. When she asked about her passport after 48 hours passed without its return, she was told there were complications at the ministry level and processing was taking longer than expected. By the end of the first week, Rebecca had not received her passport back, and her communication with home had been severely restricted. The Wi-Fi password had been changed without notice, and when she asked for the new password, she was told that internet access for staff had been temporarily suspended due to security concerns. Her phone worked on cellular data, but calls to the United States were prohibitively expensive, and she quickly used up her small international calling allowance. She tried to explain to Emma and Patricia during brief, pixelated video calls that there were technical problems, but everything was fine, trying to keep the panic from her voice as she saw the worry in her daughter's face. During the second week, a man Rebecca had never seen before introduced himself as Mansour al-Zahrani, the new household manager. He was in his 50s, with cold eyes and an authoritarian manner that contrasted sharply with the previous household operations that had been managed informally by Noura. Mansour informed Rebecca that there had been changes to her contract and her duties, changes that were necessary due to business considerations, but that would be temporary. Her passport was still being processed and would be returned once all documentation was properly updated. Rebecca tried to argue that her contract had specific terms that could not be changed without her agreement, but Mansour cut her off with a dismissive gesture. He informed her that Saudi labor law gave considerable flexibility to employers, and that as a foreign worker she had limited rights to question household decisions. If she did not like the arrangement, she could leave, though of course leaving would require her passport, which was not currently available. The implication was clear. She had no choice but to accept whatever changes were imposed. The working conditions deteriorated rapidly. Rebecca's hours extended to 16 and sometimes 18 hours per day, with duties expanding far beyond childcare She was required to help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and general household tasks that had previously been handled by other staff. The quality and quantity of her meals was reduced, from the generous portions of well-prepared food she had enjoyed during previous assignments to small servings of plain rice and vegetables provided once daily. She was moved from her comfortable quarters to a smaller room on the ground floor with no windows and a shared bathroom, told that her previous space was needed for important guests. When Rebecca tried to insist that she be allowed to return to her proper accommodations and working conditions, Mansour's response was chillingly direct. She would work as required, live where assigned, and accept the conditions provided, or she would face consequences that would make her current situation seem pleasant by comparison. There would be no return flight at the end of 3 months as her contract stipulated. She would remain at the compound until the family decided her services were no longer needed, whether that took additional months or years. Rebecca understood with sudden terrible clarity that she had been deceived from the beginning. The 9 months of professional treatment had been a careful strategy to build trust and make her return for a 4th assignment. Now that she was back, without her passport and thousands of miles from home, the family's true intentions were revealed. She was not an employee. She was a captive, and the compound that had seemed like a comfortable workplace was actually a prison designed specifically to trap foreign workers who had trusted the wrong people. That night, locked in her small room with the door controlled from the outside, Rebecca cried silently so that the guards would not hear her fear. She thought about Emma waiting for her daily phone call that would not come, about Patricia growing increasingly worried, about the terrible mistake she had made trusting that previous good treatment guaranteed future safety. She had flown willingly into this trap, and now she had no idea how to escape. The full truth of Rebecca's situation became clear during her 3rd week of the 4th assignment. She had been moved to even smaller accommodations, a windowless storage room that had been minimally converted into sleeping space with a thin mattress on the floor and a single bare light bulb. The door locked from the outside, trapping her inside whenever she was not required to work. A bucket in the corner served as her toilet, emptied once daily by a guard who watched her with dead eyes, as if she were not human at all, but simply an object the family owned. Mansour al-Zahrani summoned Rebecca to his office in the main house, a room she had never entered before during her previous assignments. The space was coldly utilitarian, with a large desk and filing cabinets covering the walls. No personal touches or warmth of any kind. Mansour sat behind the desk examining papers, while Rebecca stood before him like a prisoner awaiting sentence. When he finally looked up, his expression held no emotion at all, as he delivered information that made Rebecca's blood run cold. The al-Rashid family was not connected to Saudi royalty in any way. Faisal al-Rashid was a wealthy businessman with government connections, but his wealth came from legitimate enterprises mixed with less legal activities, including the systematic exploitation of foreign domestic workers. The entire recruitment process had been an elaborate deception. Elite International Placement Services was a legitimate agency, but they had been fooled by sophisticated false credentials and references that made the al-Rashid family appear respectable and trustworthy. The agency had no idea they were sending women into situations of forced labor and abuse. Mansour explained this matter-of-factly, as if describing routine business operations rather than criminal activity. The family had used this system for years, identifying professional foreign women with financial pressures, bringing them to Saudi Arabia for several legitimate assignments to build trust, then trapping them during a subsequent trip when their guard was down. Rebecca was not the first American they had imprisoned this way. She was not even the first American that year. Mansour opened a file and showed her photographs of other women, their faces haunted and fearful. Documentation of the family's successful pattern of exploitation. Rebecca's passport, he informed her, was locked in a safe in Faisal's office. She would not be getting it back. The family possessed photocopies of all her documents, enough to make her disappear from official records if they chose to. Her visa had been cancelled, making her presence in the kingdom technically illegal. If she tried to escape or contact authorities, she would be arrested as an undocumented foreigner before anyone listened to her story. The family had connections within local police and government offices, relationships built through bribes and favors over many years. No one would help her. The threats became more specific and more terrifying. Mansour knew where Rebecca lived in Portland. He recited her exact address at 2847 Oakwood Avenue, with a slight smile that made clear this was not just information, but a weapon. He knew Emma's school, Patricia's retirement community, David Thompson's law office. If Rebecca caused trouble, if she resisted or tried to escape, people she loved in America would experience consequences. The family had associates in the United States who could make accidents happen, who could ensure Emma and Patricia understood the price of Rebecca's disobedience. Rebecca felt the room spinning around her as she processed the magnitude of her situation. She was trapped in a foreign country with no passport, no money, no means of communication with the outside world. Her family would be threatened if she resisted. The family that had seemed so professional and kind for 9 months had been acting the entire time, setting a trap that she had walked into willingly, even eagerly, because the money had been too good and her desperation too great. Mansour dismissed her with instructions to return to work, informing her that her duties now included not just expanded childcare, but full household service, cooking, cleaning, laundry, anything the family required. Her working hours were no longer defined. She would work whenever demanded from before dawn until late at night. Meals would continue to be minimal, just enough to keep her functioning. Medical care would not be provided for any injuries or illness unless they interfered with her ability to work. Back in her cell-like room that night, Rebecca discovered she was not the only captive. A woman's voice whispered to her through the thin wall separating her space from the adjacent room. The voice spoke English with a heavy accent, introducing herself as Desta Tesfaye from Ethiopia. Desta had been held at the compound for 14 months, brought to Saudi Arabia with promises of good domestic work, then imprisoned just as Rebecca had been. She had been trying to survive one day at a time, hoping for rescue that never came. Over the next days, Rebecca met the other imprisoned workers through whispered conversations and brief moments when guards were not watching. In addition to Desta, there was Priya Kapoor from India, held for 8 months after being recruited as a tutor, and Lin Chen from China, held for 6 months after being promised translation work. All 4 women had similar stories of deceptive recruitment, legitimate initial treatment, and then sudden imprisonment once the family felt confident they could be controlled. The 4 women were kept in adjacent rooms in the staff quarters basement, a section of the compound Rebecca had never seen during her legitimate assignments. The rooms were barely habitable, cold at night despite Riyadh's heat, with minimal furnishing and no windows. The women were locked in whenever not working, let out only to perform their assigned duties under constant supervision. They ate 1 meal daily, usually rice and vegetables with occasionally a small piece of bread or meat. None of them had seen their passports since being imprisoned. All had been threatened with harm to their families if they resisted or tried to escape. Desta explained the pattern she had observed during her 14 months of captivity. The family rotated through domestic workers systematically, recruiting new women while holding others prisoner, eventually releasing those they had exhausted or who became too difficult to control. Release came with a settlement payment and threats of violence if the woman reported what had happened. Most previous victims took the money and left Saudi Arabia immediately, too traumatized and terrified to seek justice. Some had tried to report their experiences to authorities in their home countries, but without physical evidence or corroborating witnesses, Their stories were dismissed as disputes with employers rather than criminal trafficking. The system was refined through years of practice. The family knew exactly how to identify vulnerable women who would not be immediately missed, how long to maintain the appearance of legitimacy before revealing the trap, how to use threats against family members to ensure compliance. Mansour al-Zahrani had perfected the logistics, managing the imprisoned workers with cold efficiency, maintaining just enough fear to prevent rebellion while keeping the women alive and functional enough to continue working. Rebecca's spirit nearly broke during those first weeks of understanding her true situation. The psychological torture was as severe as the physical deprivation. She thought constantly about Emma and Patricia, imagining their growing panic as days passed without contact. She knew they would be calling the agency, contacting the embassy, desperately trying to find out what had happened. But the family would have prepared for this, probably telling elite international placement services that Rebecca had quit unexpectedly and left the kingdom, providing false documentation of her departure. The physical conditions worsened as December 2022 turned into January 2023. The temperature dropped at night, and the basement rooms became bitterly cold with no heat provided. Rebecca developed a persistent cough that went untreated. Her ribs ached constantly from a beating she received after refusing to work one day, struck repeatedly by one of the guards until she collapsed and agreed to continue. Her hands were raw from constant cleaning with harsh chemicals. Her hair fell out in clumps from malnutrition and stress. When she caught glimpses of herself in the bathroom mirror, she barely recognized the gaunt, hollow-eyed woman staring back. But something inside Rebecca refused to surrender completely. Perhaps it was the thought of Emma waiting for her mother to come home. Perhaps it was rage at being so thoroughly deceived and used. Perhaps it was simply the human instinct to survive against impossible odds. Whatever the source, Rebecca found within herself a core of resistance that the family's cruelty could not completely crush. She began to think not just about survival, but about escape. The 4 imprisoned women developed a secret communication system, using hand signals when guards were watching and whispered conversations during the brief moments when they were locked in their rooms at night, but close enough to hear each other through the thin walls. They shared information about guard schedules, about the compound's layout, about potential weaknesses in the security that trapped them. Desta had been observing for 14 months and had learned the patterns of daily life beyond their basement prison. Priya had discovered that one of the guards, a young man named Ibrahim Malik, showed subtle signs of discomfort with the situation, sometimes looking away when ordered to hit the women or lock them in their rooms. Rebecca suggested that Priya try to appeal to Ibrahim's conscience, to remind him that they were human beings with families who loved them, to plant seeds of doubt about whether he wanted to be complicit in their suffering. Priya began making eye contact with Ibrahim during the brief moments when he supervised their work, trying to convey desperate humanity through her gaze, occasionally whispering quick pleas in English that he did not acknowledge, but also did not report. The women also began small acts of resistance, deliberate mistakes in their work, taking longer to complete tasks, pretending not to understand instructions. These acts were punished with beatings and food deprivation, but they gave the women a sense of agency, a feeling that they were not completely powerless even in their captivity. Rebecca absorbed punishment after punishment, her body covered in bruises, her spirit battered but not broken. Every time she was locked back in her room after a beating, she thought about Emma and found the strength to face another day. A turning point came when Rebecca attempted to smuggle a note to the outside world through Ahmed Suleiman, a man who delivered laundry services to the compound weekly. She had observed that Ahmed seemed uncomfortable with the fearful demeanor of the household staff, that his eyes held sympathy when he saw the imprisoned women being marched through the compound under guard supervision. One day when he delivered clean linens, Rebecca managed to slip a small piece of paper into his delivery bag, a desperate note written in English explaining that she was an American citizen being held against her will and begging him to contact the United States Embassy on her behalf. The note never reached any authorities. Mansour al-Zahrani intercepted it, apparently having been informed by Ahmed, who either feared being implicated in criminal activity or who was already part of the family's network. The punishment for Rebecca's attempt was severe. She was beaten more brutally than ever before. Her ribs cracked, her face swollen, her body battered until she could barely stand. Then she was locked in a dark storage room for 72 hours, with no food, no water, no light. She lost consciousness several times, her mind detaching from the physical agony, floating in darkness that felt like death approaching. When she was finally pulled from the storage room, dehydrated and delirious, she was forced back to work immediately despite her injuries. No medical treatment was provided for her cracked ribs or the cuts and bruises covering her body. She was told that any future attempts to contact the outside world would result in her disappearance, her body buried somewhere in the desert where no one would ever find her, while her family in America received news of a tragic accident that prevented her return home. That night, locked in her room, Rebecca contemplated suicide. The pain was overwhelming, physical and psychological, crushing her beneath its weight. She thought about simply refusing to eat or drink, letting herself waste away until her suffering ended. But then she thought about Emma, about her daughter growing up believing her mother had abandoned her, never knowing the truth. She thought about Patricia spending the rest of her life not knowing what happened to her child. She realized that dying would be a form of surrender that would hurt the people she loved most. Instead, she chose to survive. She would find a way to escape, or she would die trying, but she would not give up. The family thought they had broken her, but they had only made her more determined. She whispered this promise through the wall to Desta, Priya, and Lynn, making them swear that they would support each other, that they would seize any opportunity for freedom no matter how slim, that they would not let their captors win. In the darkness of her cell, beaten and starving but alive, Rebecca Martinez made a vow that she would see Emma again no matter what it took. The opportunity for escape came in mid-March 2023, 4 months after Rebecca's imprisonment began. Faisal and Noura al-Rashid announced they would be traveling to Dubai for 2 weeks on business, taking the children with them. This was highly unusual. The family rarely left the compound for extended periods, but apparently important meetings and social obligations required their presence in the more cosmopolitan emirate. Most of the household security staff would accompany them, leaving only 3 guards behind to watch the compound and the imprisoned women. Desta recognized immediately that this was the best chance they would ever have. With reduced security and the family absent, the compound would be vulnerable in ways it never was during normal operations. The 4 women began planning desperately during their whispered nighttime conversations, knowing they might not have another opportunity like this for months or years. The greatest challenge was getting out of their locked rooms and past the remaining guards. Desta had been observing the security patterns for 14 months and had noticed that during the pre-dawn prayer time, when devout Muslims were at worship, the guards were often distracted and less vigilant. If they could somehow unlock their doors during that window, they might be able to reach the compound's perimeter before being discovered. Ibrahim Malik, the young guard who had shown subtle signs of conscience, was among those remaining behind. Priya had continued her quiet campaign to reach his humanity, and she believed he was conflicted about his role in their imprisonment. Rebecca suggested that they take the risk of explicitly asking for his help, explaining that if they succeeded in escaping and he helped them, he could relocate somewhere safe with their support. If they were caught, they would claim he had no involvement, protecting him from consequences. 3 days before the family's departure to Dubai, Priya found a moment when Ibrahim was supervising her work in the compound's garden, and no other guards were nearby. She spoke quickly in English, words tumbling out in desperate hope that he would listen rather than report her. She told him that she had 3 younger sisters in India, that she had come to Saudi Arabia to earn money to support them, that she had been imprisoned and abused for 8 months. She asked Ibrahim if he would want his sisters treated this way, if he could sleep at night knowing he was complicit in such cruelty. Ibrahim's face showed conflict and fear. He did not respond verbally, but he did not walk away or call for other guards. Priya pressed further, explaining that the 4 women planned to escape soon, that they needed just a small amount of help, a momentary failure of surveillance or a conveniently malfunctioning lock. She promised that if he helped them, she would ensure he received money to leave Saudi Arabia and start a new life somewhere safe from the Al-Rashid family's retaliation. For days, Ibrahim gave no sign whether he would help or report the conversation. Priya feared every moment that Mansour would summon her for punishment, that her gamble had failed and made their situation worse, but no punishment came, and gradually, Priya began to hope that Ibrahim was considering her plea. On March 18, 2023, the Al-Rashid family departed for Dubai with most of the security staff. The compound felt emptier than Rebecca had ever experienced, with only 3 guards patrolling the perimeter and the imprisoned women locked in their rooms. That night, through whispered conversations, the 4 women finalized their plan. They would wait 2 days to let the remaining guards settle into their routines and lower their vigilance. Then, in the pre-dawn hours of March 20th, they would attempt to escape. Rebecca volunteered to go first and alone. She argued that as an American citizen, she would have the best chance of being believed and helped by authorities if she reached the U.S. Embassy. Once she was safe, she would immediately report the location of the compound and demand rescue for the other 3 women. If she was caught, the others could claim ignorance of any escape attempt, potentially avoiding the worst punishment. Desta, Priya, and Lynn initially resisted this plan, arguing that they should all escape together and share whatever consequences resulted. But Rebecca insisted, pointing out that 4 women moving through the compound would be far easier to detect than 1, and that their best chance of ultimate freedom depended on at least one of them reaching safety to report what was happening. In the early hours of March 20th, Ibrahim Malik made his decision. At approximately 4 in the morning, he disabled the surveillance camera that monitored the basement corridor where the women were imprisoned. He also left Rebecca's door unlocked after the evening security check, a subtle act of mercy that could be explained as an accident if questioned. He did not speak to any of the women, did not explicitly acknowledge his assistance, but his small acts of sabotage gave Rebecca the opportunity she needed. Rebecca moved through the dark compound using the route Desta had described, staying in shadows and blind spots, holding her breath at every sound. She wore the plain clothes they had been given to work in, her feet bare because shoes would have made noise on the marble floors. Her heart pounded so violently she feared its sound would alert the guards. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to move slowly and carefully, pausing frequently to ensure no one had noticed her presence. The compound's layout was complex, but Desta's months of observation had mapped the security weak points. Rebecca moved from the staff quarters through the main house's service areas, avoiding the rooms where guards might be stationed. She reached the kitchen, moving through its silent darkness toward the service entrance that led to the outer grounds. Here was the most dangerous moment, opening the door without triggering any alarm, stepping outside where perimeter guards might see her. She turned the door handle with agonizing slowness, praying it would not creak or catch. The door opened smoothly, and she slipped through into the pre-dawn darkness of the garden. The air was cool against her skin, the first time she had been outside unsupervised in 4 months. She could see the compound's high perimeter wall perhaps 200 feet away, and beyond it the dark shapes of the surrounding neighborhood. Freedom was so close she could almost taste it. Then she heard voices. 2 guards were approaching on their patrol route, their conversation in Arabic carrying clearly through the still air. Rebecca dropped into a crouch behind a decorative fountain, making herself as small as possible, barely breathing as the guards passed within 10 feet of her hiding spot. They did not see her in the darkness. They continued their patrol circuit, their voices fading as they moved away. Rebecca waited until she could no longer hear them, then moved toward the wall. Desta had identified a service entrance near the garbage collection area, an old gate in the wall that was rarely used, and had a lock mechanism that was corroded and potentially easier to breach. Rebecca reached this gate and examined the lock, her fingers trembling as she tried to manipulate it with the improvised tools she had made from a hairpin and piece of wire. The 15 minutes she spent working on that lock were the longest of her life. Every sound made her freeze in terror. Every shadow seemed to be a guard approaching. Her fingers were slippery with nervous sweat, making the delicate manipulation of the lock mechanism nearly impossible. But desperation gave her patience she did not know she possessed. She worked methodically, feeling for the mechanism's resistance, adjusting her pressure and angle, trying again and again. The eastern horizon was beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn, when Rebecca finally felt the lock mechanism give way. The service gate opened with a soft creak that sounded like thunder in her ears. She paused, listening for any indication that she had been heard. No shouts, no running footsteps, only the normal sounds of a city beginning to wake. Rebecca stepped through the gate into a narrow alley behind the compound. She was outside. She was free. The realization hit her so powerfully that she almost sobbed aloud, but she forced herself to remain silent and move. She pulled the gate closed behind her and began walking quickly down the alley, every instinct screaming at her to run, but knowing that running would attract attention. The neighborhood was still mostly asleep, but dawn prayer time was approaching, and some residents would soon be awake. Rebecca needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and the compound before her absence was discovered. She emerged from the alley onto a larger street, uncertain which direction to go. Seeing nothing she recognized from her limited knowledge of Riyadh's geography, she chose a direction at random and began walking, trying to appear purposeful rather than desperate despite her bare feet and cheap clothing. The first hour was pure adrenaline-fueled motion, turning corners randomly, always moving but not sure toward what. As the sky lightened and the city began to truly wake, Rebecca attracted more attention. A woman walking alone in servant's clothes with no shoes was unusual enough to make people stare. Around 6:30 in the morning, Rebecca heard sounds behind her that made her blood freeze. Car engines, multiple vehicles moving fast, and the distinctive chirp of radios that suggested security or police. She could not know if it was the compound guards searching for her or unrelated traffic, but she could not risk being found. She ducked into a construction site, squeezing between concrete barriers, hiding in the shadows behind stacked building materials. The vehicles passed without stopping, but Rebecca's heart continued to race. The compound alarm would have been raised by now. Mansour would have discovered her missing during the morning check. Guards would be searching, perhaps with police assistance if the family had connections willing to help. Every moment she remained on the streets increased her risk of being found and dragged back to captivity. Rebecca forced herself to continue moving. Her feet were bleeding from walking on rough pavement. Her throat was dry, her stomach cramped with hunger. But she kept walking, navigating through residential streets into areas that seemed more commercial, hoping to find help before she was caught. Around 7:15 in the morning, Rebecca reached a busier area with shops beginning to open for the day's business. She tried to approach several people, using her limited Arabic and desperate gestures to explain that she needed help. Most people avoided her, uncomfortable with the disheveled foreign woman who clearly had problems beyond their capacity to address. Some stared with pity but kept walking. One woman actually crossed the street to avoid her. Then Rebecca saw a small shop owner unlocking his door at 156 Al-Olaya Street. Youssef Al-Mutairi was a middle-aged man who operated a mobile phone and electronics repair shop. Something in his kind face gave Rebecca hope. She approached him directly, switching to English when her Arabic failed, trying to communicate her desperation clearly. "Mister, please, I need help, American. I am American citizen held prison, need embassy. Please help me." The words tumbled out in a rush, barely coherent, but Youssef stopped and actually listened instead of walking away. His English was basic but significantly better than Rebecca's Arabic. He seemed to recognize genuine distress rather than the performance of a beggar or scam artist. Rebecca explained as clearly as she could in simple words that she was from America, that she had been working as a nanny, that she had been held prisoner and abused, that she had escaped and needed to reach the United States Embassy. Youssef's expression shifted from confusion to concern as he processed what she was saying. He asked questions to verify her story. "Where are you from? What is your name? When did you arrive in Saudi Arabia?" Rebecca answered everything, her desperation making her honest in a way that apparently convinced him of her legitimacy. Youssef made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called his nephew, Tariq al-Mutairi, explaining rapidly in Arabic that he had encountered an American woman in serious trouble who needed immediate help. Tariq arrived within 20 minutes, a man in his 30s wearing a business suit, clearly educated and professional. His English was fluent, and he listened carefully as Rebecca told her story in more detail, occasionally asking clarifying questions that showed he was evaluating her credibility. Tariq was a lawyer who specialized in commercial contracts and had some familiarity with labor law cases. What Rebecca described horrified him, particularly when she identified Faisal al-Rashid by name. Tariq knew of the al-Rashid family, had heard rumors about their treatment of domestic workers, but had never encountered direct evidence. Rebecca's account, combined with her obvious physical condition and her specific details about the compound's location, convinced him that she was telling the truth. He made an immediate assessment of the danger. If Rebecca was telling the truth about the family having connections to local police and government officials, then taking her to local authorities could result in her being returned to captivity before anyone investigated properly. The safest option was to take her directly to the United States Embassy, where her citizenship would provide at least some level of protection while her claims were evaluated. Tariq helped Rebecca into his car and drove quickly through Riyadh's morning traffic toward the embassy district. Rebecca sat in the passenger seat, barely believing that she was actually safe, that someone was helping her instead of hunting her. She watched the city pass outside the window, every moment expecting to see security vehicles from the compound, expecting to be dragged back into captivity just when freedom seemed possible. They arrived at the United States Embassy on Abdullah bin Hudhafa al-Sahmi Street around 8:45 in the morning. The sight of the American flag flying over the compound walls made Rebecca burst into tears. Emotional release after months of terror and deprivation. Tariq spoke with the security guards at the entrance checkpoint, explaining that he had an American citizen in distress who needed immediate consular assistance. The initial response was skeptical. Rebecca had no identification, no passport, nothing to prove she was actually an American citizen. Her story sounded outlandish, like something from human trafficking awareness campaigns rather than reality in modern Riyadh. But Tariq's professional standing and his insistence on the urgency of the situation convinced the guards to at least notify consular staff rather than simply turning Rebecca away. Rebecca and Tariq were asked to wait in a reception area while someone came to interview her. 45 agonizing minutes passed while Rebecca sat in a chair, her bare and bleeding feet finally at rest. accepting water from a sympathetic receptionist, but unable to relax. Every person who entered the lobby made her flinch, afraid that compound security had somehow tracked her location and would appear to drag her away. Finally, at 10:30 in the morning, a woman in her 40s wearing professional business attire entered the reception area. She introduced herself as Jennifer Morrison, a consular officer with the U.S. Department of State. Jennifer guided Rebecca and Tariq to a private office where Rebecca could tell her story without worrying about being overheard by other embassy visitors. The interview took over 2 hours. Jennifer asked detailed questions, taking careful notes, occasionally pausing the conversation to verify specific claims or to consult with other embassy staff. Rebecca explained everything, from her initial recruitment through elite international placement services, through the 3 legitimate assignments that built her trust, to the sudden imprisonment during her 4th trip and the months of abuse and forced labor that followed. She provided names, dates, specific locations, descriptions of the compound and the people who had held her captive. Jennifer Morrison had worked in consular services for 15 years and had encountered trafficking cases before, though usually involving women from Southeast Asian or South Asian countries rather than American citizens. Rebecca's account had the ring of truth, the specific details and emotional authenticity that distinguished genuine victims from the occasional fraud attempts. More tellingly, Rebecca's physical condition supported her claims. She was clearly malnourished, covered in healing bruises, with injuries consistent with abuse and forced labor. Jennifer immediately activated the embassy's protocols for assisting trafficking victims. Rebecca was moved to secure housing within the embassy compound where she would be safe while her case was investigated. Medical staff examined her, documenting her injuries with photographs and written descriptions that would later serve as evidence. A physician provided immediate treatment for her dehydration, malnutrition, and various physical injuries, including her cracked ribs that had never healed properly. FBI legal attaché, Special Agent Michael Torres, was brought into the case. Torres specialized in transnational crime and had worked multiple human trafficking investigations during his posting in Riyadh. He conducted a separate detailed interview with Rebecca, approaching the matter from a law enforcement perspective rather than consular services, identifying evidence that could support criminal prosecution and documenting facts that could be independently verified. Rebecca's most urgent concern, beyond her own safety, was the 3 women still trapped at the compound. She provided their names and countries of origin: Desta Tesfaye from Ethiopia, Priya Kapoor from India, Lin Chen from China, and she begged embassy staff to coordinate immediate rescue operations. Agent Torres explained that this would require careful diplomatic coordination with Saudi authorities, that the United States could not simply raid a private Saudi residence without kingdom cooperation, but that he would push for immediate action given the credible evidence of ongoing trafficking. By late afternoon on March 20th, Rebecca was able to video call her family in Portland for the first time in 4 months. Patricia Martinez and Emma were at home, having spent months in agonized uncertainty about Rebecca's fate. Elite international placement services had indeed told them that Rebecca had quit her position and left Saudi Arabia, but when she never arrived home and could not be contacted, they had filed missing persons reports and contacted every authority they could think of. The video call was emotional beyond words. Emma sobbed when she saw her mother, reaching toward the screen as if she could somehow touch Rebecca through the internet connection. Patricia's face showed the toll of 4 months spent not knowing if her daughter was alive or dead. Rebecca tried to stay strong during the call, not wanting to traumatize Emma with the full details of her ordeal, but her appearance told its own story: the weight loss, the healing injuries, the haunted look in her eyes that had not been there 4 months earlier. Rebecca promised Emma that she would be home soon, that the nightmare was over, that they would never be separated like that again. She told Patricia that she was safe at the embassy, that the US government was helping her, that everything would be okay. But even as she spoke these reassurances, Rebecca's mind was on Desta, Priya, and Lynn, still locked in the compound's basement, still suffering the abuse she had escaped. She would not feel truly safe until all four of them were free. The diplomatic negotiations moved with frustrating slowness. The Saudi Ministry of Interior was initially reluctant to investigate a prominent Saudi family based on the uncorroborated claims of a foreign worker. Officials suggested that this might be a simple employment dispute being exaggerated for sympathy, that domestic workers sometimes fabricated abuse claims when unhappy with working conditions. The US State Department applied pressure, escalating the matter to higher diplomatic levels, making clear that an American citizen had provided detailed testimony about trafficking and abuse that required serious investigation. Finally, after 48 hours of negotiation, Saudi authorities agreed to conduct a raid on the Al Rashid compound. On the morning of March 22, 2023, Saudi police and Ministry of Interior investigators arrived at Villa 47, Al Nakil district, with warrants to search the property and interview all residents and staff. Faisal and Noura al-Rashid had returned from Dubai the previous day, having cut their trip short when they learned that Rebecca had escaped and contacted the embassy. The police found exactly what Rebecca had described. 3 women, Desta Tesfaye, Priya Kapoor, and Lin Chen, were discovered in locked basement rooms in conditions that shocked even experienced investigators. The women were malnourished, injured, and clearly terrified. When officers explained that they were being rescued, not arrested, all 3 collapsed in emotional relief. The compound's safe contained 4 passports matching the 4 women's identities, physical evidence that supported Rebecca's claims about passport confiscation. Additional evidence included contracts with forged signatures, communications between Faisal and elite international placement services that had used false credentials, financial records showing payments to guards and staff who had participated in the imprisonment, and even handwritten notes documenting the procurement and management of foreign domestic workers that read like operational manuals for trafficking operations. Arrests were made immediately. Faisal al-Rashid, Noura al-Rashid, and Mansour al-Zahrani were taken into custody and charged with human trafficking, false imprisonment, assault, and various other crimes under Saudi law. Additional household staff members were detained for questioning, though some, including Ibrahim Malik, were released after providing testimony that supported the victims' accounts and demonstrated their own reluctant participation under threat. All 4 women, Rebecca, Desta, Priya, and Lynn, were placed in protective custody and provided with housing, medical care, and psychological support. Their passports were returned to them, the physical symbol of restored freedom that made each woman cry when the documents were placed in their hands. Support services from multiple international organizations descended to help, providing legal representation, trauma counseling, assistance with repatriation to their home countries, and guidance through the complex legal processes that would follow. The rescue made international news within days, though initial reports were carefully vague to protect the ongoing investigation. Headlines spoke of trafficking victims rescued from prominent Saudi household, of American nanny held as slave for 4 months, of systematic abuse uncovered at Riyadh compound. The stories generated shock and outrage across multiple countries, sparking conversations about domestic worker protections and the vulnerabilities that allowed such trafficking to occur. Rebecca remained in Saudi Arabia for several months as the legal case proceeded. She testified before Saudi prosecutors, providing detailed accounts of her recruitment, imprisonment, and abuse. The evidence was overwhelming. Rebecca's testimony was corroborated by the other 3 victims, by physical evidence from the compound, by witness testimony from Ibrahim Malik and other staff members who had been coerced into participating. and by documentary evidence found in the al-Rashid family's records. The trial proceeded relatively quickly by Saudi standards, fast-tracked due to international attention and diplomatic pressure. In June 2023, the court delivered its verdict. Faisal al-Rashid was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. Noura al-Rashid received 12 years. Mansour al-Zahrani was sentenced to 10 years. Additional household staff received lesser sentences ranging from probation to several years imprisonment, depending on their level of involvement and cooperation with authorities. The court also ordered financial restitution of $2.8 million to be paid to the 7 victims. 3 previous women came forward with their own stories after seeing news reports of the arrests. Rebecca's share was $400,000, compensation for lost wages, pain and suffering, medical expenses, and psychological trauma. The money could never truly compensate for what she had endured, but it represented acknowledgement that she had been wronged and provided financial security for her future. Elite International Placement Services faced civil lawsuits from multiple victims and their families. The agency had been deceived by the al-Rashid family's false credentials, but investigation revealed that their vetting processes had been inadequate, and they had failed to verify key claims about the family's background. The agency eventually settled civil cases for significant amounts and implemented enhanced verification procedures for all international placements. Permission was granted for all victims to return to their home countries in July 2023. Rebecca's return to Portland was orchestrated through U.S. government channels, with support services arranged in advance to help her transition back to normal life. When her flight landed at Portland International Airport, Patricia and Emma were waiting at arrivals, along with dozens of news cameras and reporters who wanted to document the reunion and hear Rebecca's story. Rebecca held Emma for long minutes in the arrivals area, both of them crying, neither willing to let go. Patricia wrapped her arms around both of them, her daughter and granddaughter reunited after a nightmare that had nearly destroyed them all. Rebecca made a brief statement to the assembled media, thanking the U.S. embassy staff and Saudi authorities who had helped rescue her and the other victims, but making clear that the work of prevention and justice was far from complete. The months that followed were about recovery and adaptation. Rebecca was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, undergoing regular therapy sessions with Dr. Rachel Kim, a specialist in trauma treatment at Portland's Veteran Affairs Hospital, who had experience working with trafficking survivors. The psychological wounds proved in some ways more difficult to heal than the physical ones. Rebecca experienced nightmares, panic attacks triggered by locked doors or confined spaces, hypervigilance that made normal activities exhausting, difficulty trusting others, or believing that her safety was real and permanent. Emma struggled as well, confused by her mother's changed behavior and still processing the months they had been separated. Family therapy helped them rebuild their relationship and helped Emma understand at an age-appropriate level that her mother had been hurt and needed time to heal. Patricia provided steadfast support, moving into Rebecca's apartment for several months to help with daily tasks and childcare, while Rebecca focused on recovery. The financial restitution transformed their immediate circumstances. Rebecca paid off all remaining debt, established a college fund for Emma that would ensure her daughter's education was fully funded, and set aside money for ongoing medical and therapy costs. She bought a modest house in a safe neighborhood, something she had never imagined being able to afford before this nightmare began. The money could not erase what had happened, but it removed the financial desperation that had made her vulnerable to trafficking in the first place. In October 2023, Rebecca testified before the United States Congress, invited to share her story with lawmakers considering legislation to strengthen protections for overseas domestic workers. She spoke about the sophisticated nature of modern trafficking operations, how traffickers exploit financial desperation and use legitimate-appearing processes to trap victims. She advocated for mandatory registration and enhanced oversight of international placement agencies, for better coordination between embassies and trafficking victims, for education campaigns targeting at-risk populations about warning signs of trafficking schemes. Her testimony was compelling and led to bipartisan support for the Overseas Domestic Worker Protection Act, legislation that implemented many of the safeguards Rebecca recommended. The law required international placement agencies to register with the Department of Labor, mandated enhanced vetting of overseas employers, established better coordination between embassies and domestic worker cases, and created emergency response protocols for trafficking situations. Rebecca also became a spokesperson for End Slavery Now, an anti-trafficking organization that had been working for years to combat modern slavery globally. She traveled to conferences and universities, sharing her story and educating audiences about the reality of labor trafficking. She participated in training programs for law enforcement officers, teaching them how to identify trafficking indicators and properly interview potential victims. She consulted with government agencies developing policies to protect domestic workers from exploitation. The connection between the 4 women rescued from the Al-Rashid compound remained strong. Desta Tesfaye had returned to Ethiopia and become an advocate for domestic worker rights, working with government officials to implement protections for Ethiopian citizens working abroad. Priya Kapoor completed a law degree in India and specialized in human trafficking cases, providing legal representation to victims and pushing for stronger enforcement. Lin Chen worked with international labor organizations based in Beijing, focusing on trafficking prevention across the Asia-Pacific region. The 4 women maintained regular contact through monthly video calls and annual in-person gatherings, each year meeting in a different location. Their first gathering in 2024 was in Portland, where Rebecca hosted them all. The second was in Addis Ababa with Desta, the third in Mumbai with Priya, the fourth in Beijing with Lin. These gatherings were celebrations of survival and freedom, opportunities to support each other's continued healing, and planning sessions for their collective advocacy work. 3 previous victims of the Al-Rashid trafficking operation also came forward after the arrests. Women from Kenya, Bangladesh, and Brazil, who had been held between 2018 and 2021 before being released with settlement payments and threats to remain silent. Amara Okafor from Kenya, Nazreen Chowdhury from Bangladesh, and Lucia Fernandez from Brazil joined the Survivor Network, adding their voices to the advocacy efforts. All 7 women testified together before the United Nations Human Rights Council in 2025, providing a comprehensive picture of how the trafficking operation had functioned and what systemic changes were needed to prevent similar cases. A documentary series featuring all survivors' perspectives aired on major streaming platforms in 2026, reaching millions of viewers globally and significantly raising awareness about domestic worker trafficking. The series, titled 5 Flights to Freedom, after Rebecca's experience, combined the women's first-hand testimony with investigative journalism about the broader patterns of trafficking in the Gulf states and globally. The impact was measurable in increased reporting of suspicious recruitment practices and more victims coming forward with their own stories. Ibrahim Malik, the guard who had helped Rebecca escape, was granted asylum in Canada, where he resettled and began working in immigrant services, helping refugees navigate their new lives. He credited the women's courage with changing his perspective on justice and human dignity, explaining in interviews that their desperation had forced him to examine whether he could live with being complicit in their suffering. He maintained occasional contact with Rebecca and the other women, always expressing gratitude that they had never implicated him despite the risks he had taken to help them. The Al-Rashid family's compound was seized by Saudi authorities and eventually sold, with proceeds directed to the restitution fund for victims. Faisal and Noura's 3 children were placed in the care of relatives. The family's business assets were frozen and investigated. revealing a complex network of legitimate and criminal enterprises that extended beyond just domestic worker trafficking. Additional criminal charges followed as investigators uncovered evidence of money laundering, bribery, and connections to other trafficking operations. Public awareness of domestic worker trafficking increased significantly following Rebecca's case. Google search data showed sharp spikes in queries about trafficking warning signs, overseas employment safety, and domestic worker rights. Educational campaigns launched by various organizations used Rebecca's story as a central case study, reaching at-risk communities with information about how to identify and avoid trafficking schemes. The impact was difficult to measure precisely, but appeared substantial, with reported incidents of successful trafficking operations declining in regions where awareness campaigns were most intensive. Academic researchers began studying Rebecca's case and the broader phenomenon of domestic worker trafficking. Universities incorporated the case into law school curricula, social work programs, and international relations courses. Rebecca participated in several research projects, working with scholars to document the psychological manipulation tactics used by traffickers and the most effective intervention and support strategies for survivors. Published papers based on this research informed policy development and training programs globally. 5 years after her rescue, in 2028, Rebecca was living a life she could barely have imagined during those desperate months in captivity. Emma was now 13 years old, thriving academically and socially, with no lasting trauma from the period her mother had been missing. She knew the basic outline of what had happened to Rebecca, presented in age-appropriate ways as she matured, and she was proud of her mother's advocacy work rather than ashamed of what had occurred. Rebecca worked full-time as a trafficking prevention educator for an international NGO, traveling regularly to speak at conferences and train law enforcement officers. She had published a memoir titled 5 Flights to Freedom in 2026, which became a bestseller and was eventually adapted into the documentary series. All proceeds from the book and series were directed to the Freedom Promise Project, a foundation Rebecca established to provide emergency assistance to trafficking victims and fund prevention education in at-risk communities. The Freedom Promise Project had raised over $1.2 million by 2028 and had directly helped 89 trafficking victims with legal assistance, housing support, and psychological services. The Foundation's prevention education programs reached over 200 at-risk communities globally, providing training to young people about how to identify suspicious job offers, verify employer credentials, maintain communication with family, and seek help if trapped in exploitative situations. The Foundation also maintained a 24-hour emergency hotline that had helped 34 domestic workers escape exploitative situations before they escalated to the level of trafficking. Rebecca still attended therapy regularly, finding that while the most acute symptoms of her PTSD had diminished, certain triggers remained challenging. She could not fly first class without experiencing panic attacks. The luxury that had once represented success, now inextricably linked to the flights that took her into captivity. She avoided international travel when possible, and when required for her work, she always traveled with a colleague and maintained constant communication with family. Locked doors still triggered anxiety, though she had learned coping mechanisms to manage her response. Despite ongoing challenges, Rebecca felt her life had found meaningful purpose. She had transformed the trauma of her trafficking experience into a mission to prevent others from suffering similarly. Every person she educated about trafficking warning signs, every victim she helped escape exploitation, every policy change she influenced represented a kind of victory over the family that had tried to break her spirit and steal her freedom. In her advocacy work, Rebecca emphasized several key messages that she wished she had understood before accepting the position with the al-Rashid family. She stressed that trafficking operations deliberately target financially desperate people, that traffickers are skilled at appearing legitimate and trustworthy, that even intelligent, educated people can be deceived by sophisticated schemes. She warned against job offers that seem too good to be true, against employers who pressure quick decisions or request passport surrender, against any situation that isolates workers from support systems and communication. She also advocated for systemic changes beyond individual caution, stronger international labor protections enforced through bilateral agreements, mandatory oversight and registration of recruitment agencies, embassy staff training to recognize trafficking indicators, rapid response protocols when domestic workers request help, penalties for countries with poor enforcement of worker protections, technology solutions like apps connecting workers with verified employers and digital check-in systems. The statistics Rebecca cited in her presentations were sobering. The International Labour Organization estimated over 50 million people were in situations of modern slavery globally, with domestic workers particularly vulnerable due to their isolation, limited legal protections, and invisibility within private households. Trafficking occurred in all regions, not just the Gulf states where Rebecca had been trapped, with domestic workers exploited in North America, Europe, Asia, and Africa under various schemes that shared common elements of deception, control, and abuse. But Rebecca also shared success stories that gave hope. Since her case had gained international attention, an estimated 47 additional trafficking victims had been identified and rescued using similar intervention models. 23 recruitment schemes had been shut down following investigations triggered by increased awareness. 8 countries had implemented new domestic worker protection laws. The compound effect of awareness, policy change, and survivor advocacy was creating measurable impact in the fight against modern slavery. Rebecca's annual speaking tour reached over 50,000 people in 2028, combining public presentations with targeted training for law enforcement, social workers, and embassy staff. She worked with 15 international NGOs to coordinate anti-trafficking efforts. She served as a consultant to multiple governments developing domestic worker protection policies. She mentored other survivors entering advocacy work, sharing strategies for managing the emotional toll while using their experiences to help others. In moments of reflection, Rebecca thought about the chain of decisions and circumstances that had led her into trafficking. The financial desperation created by medical bills and single parenthood, the legitimate appearing job posting that seemed like a miracle solution, the calculated deception of the al-Rashid family who had refined their trafficking methods through years of practice, the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed such trafficking to occur, inadequate oversight, weak enforcement, international legal gaps, power imbalances that made domestic workers easy targets. She thought about how different her life would be if she had never seen that job posting, if she had dismissed it as too good to be true, if elite international placement services had properly vetted the al-Rashid family, if Saudi authorities had been monitoring domestic worker situations more carefully. She would still be struggling financially, working multiple jobs to pay medical bills, watching Emma grow up in poverty despite her best efforts. The trafficking had destroyed parts of her, but had also, paradoxically, eventually provided the financial security and purposeful mission that had been so desperately lacking before. Most of all, Rebecca thought about the importance of bearing witness and breaking silence. Trafficking thrives in darkness, in victims' shame and fear that prevents them from speaking about their experiences. Every victim who shares their story helps other potential victims recognize danger. Every survivor who pursues justice helps weaken the systems that enable trafficking. Every person who listens and believes a trafficking survivor helps transform a culture that too often dismisses such stories as exaggerations or accepts exploitation as inevitable. Rebecca's legacy, she hoped, would be ensuring that no one else would make 5 flights to slavery without understanding the warning signs that she had missed. That financial desperation would not blind others to the red flags she had rationalized away. That the next American nanny offered an opportunity too good to be true, would pause, research thoroughly, trust her instincts, and choose safety over the promise of easy money. That the systems meant to protect workers would actually function, that agencies would properly verify employers, that embassies would respond quickly to distress signals, that international cooperation would prioritize human dignity over diplomatic convenience. She also hoped that any woman currently trapped in situations like hers would know that escape was possible, that rescue services existed, that authorities could help if contacted, that survival and recovery were achievable even after the worst trauma. She wanted every imprisoned domestic worker to understand that they were not alone, that networks of survivors and advocates existed to support them, that their suffering mattered to people who would fight for their freedom. On the 5-year anniversary of her escape in March 2028, Rebecca visited the U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, invited to speak at a training session for new consular officers about how to recognize and respond to trafficking cases. Standing in the same building where she had found sanctuary 5 years earlier, looking at the American flag that had meant freedom when she was desperate and terrified, Rebecca felt the full weight of how far she had traveled from that morning when she had stumbled through the compound gates with bleeding feet and no hope except the determination to survive. She told the assembled diplomats about her experience, about the months of imprisonment, about her escape, about the immediate response from Jennifer Morrison and Agent Torres that had saved her life. She explained what had worked in her case and what could be improved for future victims. She emphasized the importance of believing trafficking victims even when their stories seemed outlandish, of moving quickly rather than waiting for perfect evidence, of coordinating with law enforcement and other countries to ensure comprehensive rescue operations. After her presentation, a young consular officer approached Rebecca and thanked her for sharing her story. The woman explained that she had been assigned to Riyadh just weeks earlier and felt overwhelmed by the complexity of trafficking cases and the challenges of helping victims within the constraints of diplomatic protocol. Rebecca's testimony had helped her understand what victims experience and had given her concrete tools to recognize and assist those who might come to the embassy desperate for help. This conversation, repeated in various forms dozens of times each year, was why Rebecca continued her exhausting advocacy work despite the emotional toll. Every person she educated was a potential link in the chain of prevention and rescue. Every law enforcement officer who learned to recognize trafficking indicators might save a victim. Every policy change she influenced might protect hundreds or thousands of vulnerable workers. Every survivor who heard her story and felt less alone was a victory against the shame and isolation that traffickers used as weapons. Rebecca returned to Portland after the Riyadh visit, welcomed home by Emma and Patricia at the airport in a routine that never failed to move her emotionally. Every return home, from any trip no matter how brief, reminded her of the months when she thought she would never see them again, when she was locked in a dark room with no certainty that she would survive. The freedom to travel, to choose her own schedule, to communicate whenever she wanted, to hold her daughter. These basic rights she had lost and regained would never feel ordinary again. That evening, sitting in her living room with Emma curled against her on the couch and Patricia in a nearby chair, Rebecca felt a peace that had eluded her for years. The trauma would always be part of her history. The nightmares still came occasionally. Certain situations still triggered anxiety. But she was free. She was home. She was using her experience to protect others. And that was enough. Emma looked up at her mother and asked what Rebecca had been thinking about. Rebecca smiled and stroked her daughter's hair, considering how to answer. She decided on the truth, simplified but honest. I was thinking about how much I love you, and how grateful I am that we're together, and how I get to spend my life helping people who need it. That feels good. Emma hugged her tighter and said that she was proud of her mom for being so brave and helping so many people. Patricia smiled from her chair, seeing in her daughter the strength that had survived captivity and transformed into something meaningful. Rebecca Martinez had flown 5 times to Saudi Arabia, 3 times in comfort and trust, building a trap she didn't recognize, once into captivity that nearly destroyed her, and finally, on a rescue flight home, toward recovery and purpose. The journey had cost her dearly, but had also given her a mission. She would spend the rest of her life ensuring that the phrase, 5 flights to freedom, represented not just her survival, but a warning and a promise to everyone who might face similar danger. Freedom, she had learned, was worth any fight, and helping others find freedom was the truest purpose she could imagine.